Chairman Mao's open culture is unique and full of dialectics, that is to say, he paid attention to openness, such as accepting Marxism, studying Western history, and dealing with the West including Nixon. At the same time, he paid great attention to openness. For example, he always advocates independence and self-reliance. Some people think that foreigners' farts smell good, and he is particularly disgusted. In 1975, Mao Zedong said a very vivid sentence at a meeting of the Politburo: in education, journalism, culture, and art, there are many more, and in the medical field, it is good for foreigners to fart. I couldn't eat eggs for 2 years, because the Soviets published an article saying that there was cholesterol in them. Then another article said that cholesterol is not a problem, and that they can be eaten. The moon is also good for foreign countries, so don't underestimate dogmatism. Chairman Mao meets with Australian Prime Minister Whitlam. Western politicians often show respect and respect very naturally in front of Chairman Mao. Chairman Mao said in the article the bankruptcy of the idealist view of history: since the Chinese have learned Marxism-Leninism, the Chinese people have changed from passive to active in spirit. From then on, the modern world history that looked down on China people, the era of looking down on Chinese culture should be over. The great victorious Chinese people's war of liberation and the great people's revolution have revived and are revitalizing the culture of the great Chinese people. Chairman Mao here believes that the revival of Chinese culture is accomplished by the revolutionary people. Chairman Mao himself is officially an outstanding representative of the Chinese people. He put forward his own cultural outlook just when New China was about to be established. History has proved that Chairman Mao's cultural outlook represented China's advanced culture. Chairman Mao meets Nixon. In January 1940, Chairman Mao put forward the concept of New Democratic culture for the first time in On New Democracy, and elaborated on the new democratic cultural thought he advocated. In this article, Chairman Mao clearly defined and expressed the scope of new democratic culture, the leadership class and leadership ideas, its nature, definition, connotation, etc., which is the most concentrated expression of his new democratic cultural view. It can also be said to be a systematic elaboration of his cultural views. Chairman Mao's definition of new democratic culture, the so-called new democratic culture, in a word, is the anti-imperialist and anti-feudal culture of the masses of the people led by the proletariat. This is completely consistent with the political program of the New Democratic Revolution of the Communist Party of China, and further embodies the superstructure attribute of new democratic culture serving new politics and new economy. Chairman Mao met with Tanaka. The connotation of Chairman Mao's new democratic culture, the scientific and popular culture of the nation, is the culture of the masses against imperialism and feudalism, the culture of new democracy, and the new culture of the Chinese nation. This thought became the core content and feature of Chairman Mao's new democratic cultural outlook. It was here that Chairman Mao defined the concept of the new culture of the Chinese nation. Chairman Mao deeply understood that the invasion of China by Western powers since 1840 was not only political and economic, but also cultural. He eulogized the heroic attack on imperialist culture since the May 4th movement, and especially praised Lu Xun's fighting spirit. Lu Xun's bones are the hardest. He has no slavish face or flattery. This is the most precious character of the colonial and semi-colonial people. The direction of Lu Xun is the direction of the new culture of the Chinese nation. Therefore, in Chairman Mao's cultural outlook, anti-imperialism should be an important content of new democratic culture. Nationality should be the fundamental form of new democratic culture. This national character is reflected in it opposes imperialist oppression and advocates the dignity and independence of the Chinese nation. Under the teaching of Chairman Mao, the Chinese people are self-reliant and self-reliant, not relying on others, not relying on groveling, not relying on sovereign deals, but completely relying on self-reliance and hard work to change China's destiny. Chairman Mao meets Kissinger. In line with his cultural outlook, Chairman Mao has a complete set of independent ideological systems. In the 1950s, when Tian Atong, a special craftsman of Beijing Hongdu Fashion Company, made clothes for Chairman Mao, he made a transformation on the basis of the Chinese tunic suit, in order to reflect the leader's tall and stalwart figure and extraordinary bearing. The general collar, sleeves, pockets, the shape of the front and back body has been revised and adjusted to make it more grand and noble, and to strengthen the new style of Oriental culture. Some foreigners call it Mao-style clothing. Subsequently, the main leaders of the central government such as Zhou Enlai and Zhu De all wore this Mao-style uniform. This also affected the shape of the martial suit later. There is also a small story. On August 24, 1954, Chairman Mao met with former British Prime Minister and Labour Party leader Attlee. The staff saw that he was wearing a pair of pants with rib patches on the buttocks and worn white knees. Advise him to change one. He said, "It doesn't matter who is looking behind me. Besides, I can't sit up, how can I be ugly?" The staff couldn't laugh or cry. Independence means independence without attachment, autonomy without blind obedience. From the perspective of Chairman Mao's practice, he always insisted that the theory, line, principles, and policies of the party guiding the Chinese Revolution must be formulated independently by our party. The practical activities of the party leading the Chinese Revolution must be carried out independently. The earlier expression of the idea of independence was Chairman Mao's statement in Against Bookishness in May 1930 that the victory of China's revolutionary struggle depends on the Chinese comrades' understanding of China's situation. 2. On Practice and on Contradiction, written between July and August 1937. In it, Chairman Mao put forward the idea that the masses are the main body of social practice, that external causes are the conditions for change, and that internal causes are the basis for change. At this time, his independence thought has matured. 3. In his report on the tactics against Japanese imperialism published in 1935, Chairman Mao clearly put forward the far-reaching thought of mainly relying on self-reliance, supplemented by seeking foreign aid, as a must adhere to the issue of revolution and construction in principle. 4. Chairman Mao proposed at the 6th plenary session of the 6th Central Committee of the party held in 1938, "Our policy is independence in the United Front, which is both unified and independent." 5. Chairman Mao put it forward in the article "The Interests of the Soviet Union and the Interests of Mankind," written in September 1939. He said, "China's foreign policy focuses on self-reliance, and at the same time does not give up all possible foreign aid." It can be seen from this that Chairman Mao's independent thinking is systematic rather than scattered, let alone a whim. The details of his clothes are not a matter of personality, but a matter of his principles. This may be the reason people talk about the details that determine success or failure. Without such attention to detail, it would be impossible for Chairman Mao to lead New China to independence and self-reliance to create amazing achievements in the world. We know that the birth of New China after World War II has changed the geopolitical structure of the world. Coupled with the differences in ideology, many Western developed countries and later the Soviet Union and other countries have imposed economic blockades on my country. The country develops friendly relations. The first generation of leaders of our country headed by Chairman Mao made great efforts and struggled. By the early 1970s, they finally broke through the blockade of external forces. Contact and develop relationships. What we are particularly proud of is that despite the backward economic conditions at that time, our people never gave in to external pressure, bravely defended the dignity of the motherland, and formed a fine tradition of independence and self-reliance. Under the leadership of the party, the people of all ethnic groups in our country have initially established a relatively complete and independent economic system and economic foundation on the basis of 1 poor and 2 white. The independent innovation capability on the internet is close to or has reached the world-class level. At the same time, the Chinese government has been firmly popularizing basic education, and the quality of the labor force in the world's most populous countries has been generally improved. These have laid a key foundation for the great economic development after my country's reform and opening up. Under the new historical conditions, how to be independent and self-reliant is still a subject that requires independent and self-reliant research and practice. In particular, we need to carry forward Chairman Mao's spirit of exploration. We can point out the mistakes of the older generation, but we must be careful not to accuse mistakes of exploration, because mistakes in exploration are much more meaningful than ignorant blind obedience. In the era of Chairman Mao, both the United States and the Soviet Union encountered New China as an important obstacle when promoting hegemonic power politics, and they had nothing to do with Chairman Mao. The New China led by Chairman Mao is a country that cannot be won, intimidated, deceived, or trapped. I don't know how many people in the world have racked their brains and don't know how to solve the mystery of Chairman Mao. In front of Chairman Mao, Western white people who worship the superior wins the inferior loser have to admit that Mao Zedong is the victor of history. He has to admit that Mao Zedong's thinking is powerful. He has to admit that the Chinese nation that gave birth to Chairman Mao is not an inferior nation, and he has to admit that the Chinese nation that gave birth to Mao Zedong is not an inferior nation. The Chinese culture that came out of Chairman Mao's thought is not an inferior culture. In 1971, the United Nations Resolution 2758 restored the legal seat of the People's Republic of China in the United Nations. From then on, New China went to the world with its head held high. Western politicians also came to China one after another to discuss with the person they couldn't figure out. In November 1971, the Chinese delegation attended the UN General Assembly for the first time. Jiao Guanhua, head of the delegation, Huang Hua, deputy head of the delegation, and representatives Fu Hao, Chen Chu, and Xiong Xionghui became the focus of reporters' attention at the venue. Chairman Mao's opening up was not forced, it was completely voluntary, and Chairman Mao's opening up was based on maintaining the dignity of the country. Chairman Mao remained unswerving in his views on culture throughout his life, and he especially emphasized the dignity and independence of the nation. These expositions and the practice of the elders are worthy of our repeated thinking and deep understanding today. This article is an excerpt from Selected Works of Deng Xiaoping, Volume 2. It is part of the conversation that Comrade Deng Xiaoping met with Stevens, the then deputy leader of the Republican Party of the U.S. Senate, and Chen Xiaomei, the vice chairman of the U.S. President's Export Council. In 1983, Deng Xiaoping met with Chen Xiaomei, a Chinese-American and vice chairman of the U.S. President's Export Council. The principled standpoint for developing Sino-US relations. January 4, 1981. We hope that Mr. Reagan can make new contributions to the development of Sino-US relations after he becomes president. The opening of a new page in Sino-US relations began with the Republican Party, when Mr. Nixon and Mr. Kissinger were in power. We always remember that it was Mr. Nixon who made up his mind to improve Sino-US relations during his presidency. During President Carter's tenure, Sino-US relations had new developments, but in the latter stage of his term, there was a Taiwan Relations Act. As far as China is concerned, we hope that Sino-US relations will continue to develop. Frankly, some of the things Mr. Reagan said in his campaign platform really disturbed us. When Mr. Bush came, we said that we understand that the language in your country's campaign may not necessarily be implemented after it is in office. Our focus is on what Mr. Reagan will do when he takes office. The establishment of diplomatic relations between China and the United States in 1979 mainly resolved the Taiwan issue, and the United States recognized Taiwan as a part of China. Only by solving this problem can the new relationship between China and the United States be established and continue to develop. The Taiwan issue was originally a past issue, but now it has been brought up again. We ask Mr. Bush to convey to Mr. Reagan our clear position on this issue. We have noticed that there are roughly 4 viewpoints in American newspapers and some people. If these viewpoints are not clarified, it is likely to lead to a retreat in Sino-US relations. In 1985, Deng Xiaoping met with U.S. President Ronald Reagan. The first point of view is that China is weak and poor, and its equipment is backward, so China is insignificant and a country that does not deserve attention. This question is not a small question, but a question of judging the balance of power in the world. As for saying that we are poor and weak, we have never evaded it, we have always said so. China has its strengths, that is, it has a large place and a large population, but it is indeed poor and its equipment is indeed backward. But we also have a clear estimate of ourselves, we have the advantage of being big, and we don't believe in evil. The Chinese have always acted according to their own opinions. Everyone is well aware of the past. The People's Republic of China was established by relying on self-reliance. In very difficult times, we also dare to face up to the reality and use weak power to face powerful power. Although China is poor and weak, it needs to do things by itself, and China dares to face the reality. Therefore, those who misjudge China's position in world politics will at least not have a correct international strategy. The second point of view is that China now needs the United States, but the United States has nothing to ask from China. Such arguments have appeared more than once in the American press. We have also done some stupid things in the past 2 years, which caused some people's illusions. There are quite a few delegations of this kind and that kind going to the United States, but we have not controlled them, and some delegations are not cautious in their words and actions. Originally, it was not a bad thing to visit, but a good thing, but it caused some people to misunderstand that China now needs others. Not only in the United States, but also in Europe may have such a reflection. In the future, we will send delegations to control it. Of course, this does not mean that normal exchanges do not need to be developed. Recently we are undergoing an economic adjustment. The fact that we dare to report a fiscal deficit shows that we still have a certain self-confidence. Through adjustments, our fiscal revenue and expenditure can basically reach a balance this year. Japanese friends said that they never believed that fiscal balance could be achieved by means of control. We can do it, and we have further determined that China must adhere to the principle of self-reliance in its modernization drive. China is very poor, but it has one advantage, that is, China's own ability to survive is relatively strong, and it is used to living in poverty. The most typical is our Yan'an period, where it was difficult to eat and dress. Including our anti-Japanese base areas at that time, we were able to survive under very difficult conditions. Now we can survive if all international access is cut off. Even if there are major turmoil and various unpredictable changes in the world now, China itself can survive. Thinking that China depends on people's judgment will lead to wrong decisions. The third point of view is that if the US government adopts a tough policy towards the Soviet Union, China can swallow issues like Taiwan. Can't swallow it, won't swallow it. If such a situation really occurs, China will not swallow it if the Taiwan issue forces Sino-US relations to go backwards. China must respond accordingly. We say that it is not good to stagnate Sino-US relations, and it is even worse to regress, but once something happens that forces our relationship to regress, we can only face the reality. As for the extent of the retrogression, it depends on the situation that led to the retrogression. It is not good to talk too much, but it must be clear that if China-US relations need to go backwards on the Taiwan issue, China can only face the reality, and will not, as some people in the USA, oppose the Soviet Union. It is impossible for China's strategy to swallow up the Taiwan issue. Recently, an incident happened in the Netherlands. It is said that a Dutch company is planning to sign a contract with Taiwan to manufacture 2 submarines for Taiwan. The Dutch government, of course, intervened in this matter. In fact, the Dutch government got the support of some people for this deal. We are taking this issue seriously. If the Netherlands does not change this decision, the relationship between China and the Netherlands will definitely go backwards. Of course, we have a little work to do and hope that the Netherlands will change its position, because we saw that its parliament passed this decision with a narrow majority, so it is not entirely impossible to change the deal. If it doesn't work after doing the work, then we will take further measures. I hope that similar things will not happen between China and the United States. Since the normalization of Sino-US and Sino-Japanese relations was realized after solving the problem that Taiwan is part of Chinese territory, the question of whether Sino-US relations, Sino-Japanese relations, and relations between China and other countries can continue to develop in the future is a question of focus. We have noticed that some people say that Mr. Reagan may send the president's personal representative to Taiwan. Today I say frankly that if there is such a situation, we don't think it is some kind of private representative, but a formal government-to-government relationship. If this or similar things happen, we will definitely think that the decision of the US government has changed the principles of the Sino-US Communique on the establishment of diplomatic relations and the Shanghai Communique. Its nature is not only to bring Sino-US relations to a standstill, but to set it back. The fourth view is that the Chinese government embraces an ideology designed to destroy a government like the United States. Such a view is at least not the view of the 1980s, nor the view of the 1970s, but a restoration of the view before the 1960s. I repeated that we sincerely hope that Sino-US relations will not only not stagnate, but will develop. We pay attention to the remarks made during the campaign and before the president took office, but we can make some sense of them. What we value is the actions taken by the new US administration after taking office. What I just said is the official position of the Chinese government. I think it is very important and necessary for American friends to clearly understand the official position of the Chinese government.